few weeks back, I took a look at almost every Duke Nukem game ever made in a video that was a bit of a retrospective on the entire series to date. However, it seemed I missed out on an important title, and that's the DLC for Duke Nukem Forever called The Doctor Who Cloned Me. Now this was unique because it's the only single player DLC released for Duke Nukem Forever. And just like Duke Nukem Forever, this was also developed by Triptych Games along with Gearbox Software and released in December 2011. Imagine if you got that as a Christmas present. What kind of shocked me most about this DLC though was that a lot of people seem to talk really highly about it, almost like it's actually worth playing, which is a bold statement. Well, seeing as I didn't cover it in my Duke Nukem video and people have been bugging me about it ever since, I thought I'd do a video on it, just to let everyone know what they're missing out on. And while this DLC did have some multiplayer content, it's the single player stuff that people really care about. Thing is, it's kinda hard to talk about it without going into any kind of great detail, so you know what, let's just go into it from start to finish. It's not like there's anything really to be spoiled anyway, and if you're worried about spoilers for Duke Nukem Forever DLC, well, I think you can spend that energy on something far more worthwhile. So let's get into it and review Duke Nukem Forever, The Doctor Who Cloned Me.
Lesson 1.
Now the whole thing begins with Duke strapped down to some kind of chair in this dark, dingy room being monitored by someone we don't see. Off screen, someone gives the order to have Duke executed, and a cyborg referred to as the Dukinator comes out to do the job, but Duke manages to overpower this thing and he breaks free. After a short piss break, which serves as the first ego boost, you figure out it's none other than Dr. Proton who held you captive all this time. Then you head off to the bowels of Area 51 to hunt him down. In the next level, Dr. Proton gloats for a bit on a giant screen, looking like a combination of Dr. Breen from Half-Life 2 and the Borg from Star Trek.
I knew you wouldn't disappoint.
You then get your first real combat sequence and get to play around with the Expander, returning from Duke Nukem 3D, which looks like some kind of expensive iron. This area doesn't last all that long, and about the only other point of interest is a porno mag for people with mud fetishes. In the next area, you've got to deal with a haywire laser system, which is followed by what I think is my favourite line in the entire DLC.
That was close enough to shave my balls.
Then there's some combat with these annoying little alien things. Oh yeah, and then some more titties. The next area starts to pick up a little bit. Now things start off with you mowing down some Dukinators and pig cops with a machine gun turret, which is pretty fun. After that, you've got to help some poor scientist get out of a locked door, which of course goes completely awry. Then you ride this huge carousel machine to get to higher ground, which takes a little bit of skill so you don't fall to your death. At this point, you discover Dr. Proton's ultimate plan. Now we discover he's not actually working with the aliens. Instead, his plan is to use Duke clones to defeat the aliens and take over the Earth. What an asshole.
I hate to kick my own ass, but it's gotta be done.
You get to see this firsthand in the next level where you reach the cloning facility where there's dozens of these guys.
I've got balls of steel?
Check. Proceed.
There's even Dukes that speak different languages. German Duke, Italian Duke. Sadly though, there's no Aussie Duke. I wonder what kind of things an Australian Duke Nukem would say anyway.
Gentlemen, this is Democracy Manifest.
Really though, this whole level is just one big ego boost to help the player boost their maximum health points. And there's like 7 or 8 of these just right after the other. You play basketball, you hit a punching bag, you do a pull-up, you win an arm wrestling match against yourself. You bicep curl, deadlift, and then you watch a porno. What follows, I think, is probably the worst section in the entire DLC, when you have to do this stupid training sequence to prove you're a worthy cyborg. It just kind of feels like a lame tutorial you'd see at the beginning of a game, and it just goes on too long. You at least get to play with one of the new guns though, called the Impregnator, which looks like a giant testicle with wires coming out of it. This thing's projectiles explode on contact with enemies, sending out acidic jizz in every direction. After that, you gotta break out of the facility, which involves murdering all of your cyborg clones. Now, I know these cyborgs are supposed to be the bad guys and all that, but still, something about this felt kinda messed up. You know what I mean? Like killing other Duke Nukems. I mean, just imagine if they could have been reprogrammed for a good cause. Like, such a waste.
Esa apuesta segura.
Anyway, the next level brings back the old shrunken down gimmick where you have to spend a bit of time running around when you're shrunk down to the size of a Coke can. It all leads to a short vehicle section where you're driving this talking Barbie buggy through the inside of all these machines, trying to not get squished, and for some reason too, this buggy has a nitro boost.
We'll share everything, even boys.
To be honest though, I didn't actually mind this section all that much. I mean, it might be a bit repetitive, but at least it was a bit more fast paced and it felt like I was making actual progress. You soon crash this buggy just around the same time that it starts to become annoying. Then the game presents you with an image that I think sums up the entire DLC. And that's the visual of floating turds and used tampons in a water pipe you have to swim through. I mean, if you ever wanted to capture Duke Nukem Forever in a single image, well, this is it.
Someday, I want to have 2 boyfriends, just like Mom.
Anyway, soon after this, you meet up with your buddy Dylan. Yeah, Dylan, you son of a bitch.
You son of a bitch.
Could have sworn this guy died in the last game, but it appears he's still alive and kicking, and he manages to still be a hilarious walking trope.
With you here, buddy, this ought to be a piece of cake.
Though Dylan doesn't watch where he's going like a total idiot, and he ends up being shrunk down too. After Duke manages to get back to normal size though, Dylan is still stuck being small, which leads to some of the funniest moments in the DLC.
Oh, fuck me! Nice one. Now I'm the fucking tiny one. Perfect.
Where you basically have to pick him up like he's an action figure and throw him into vents, and I have to admit seeing this little guy running around and swearing up a storm was pretty funny. This chapter is also called The Doctor Is In, which should tell you all you need to know. Yep, it's boss fight time. In the next room, Dr. Proton sends out a bunch of homing exploding balls at you before he finally shows up and you fight him one-on-one, in what is one of the most underwhelming boss fights of all time. The fight is pretty simple though, you just kinda damage him, but then when he tries to heal up at one of these 4 terminals, you flip the corresponding switch to electrocute and interrupt him. You do this 4 times, then Duke snaps his neck like a straight up beast, which is honestly kinda fucking brutal. Still though, it feels like a bit of an anticlimactic finish for one of Duke's better antagonists. Gotta say, I did expect this guy to come back later in the game, like maybe he managed to clone himself or something, you know, seeing as the whole theme of the first half of DLC is cloning. But I guess they didn't do that because that would have been a good idea. But you don't have time to mourn these bad design choices because General Graves shows up and tells you the alien queen is on the moon and Duke has to destroy a teleporter to stop them from getting to Earth. And the next couple of levels are actually pretty good. Now you and Dylan are on this floating platform that's moving through this facility, and you gotta dodge harmful lasers and pig cops that ambush you along the way.
You'll never get me! Can't hit me, cocksuckers! Ahoo! Look out!
Eventually you're forced to stop and have to go off on foot and restore the power, along with dealing with more enemies that spawn in. And these sections are pretty fun. Plus they show that the game can be enjoyable when the environments are laid out in a way that lets you utilize cover and pick and choose what kind of weapons you want to use. At some point again too, you've got to put Mini Dylan to use so we can open this gate for you. I mean, look at him. Look how cute he is. Then you've got to use a nearby crane to grab a forklift before switching the power back on again. Seems the people who work in Area 51 are all just horny bastards because there's another computer here that's got TNA as a desktop wallpaper. After this, you finally reach the surface and meet up with General Graves in what I think is probably one of the best segments in the game, because finally there's some real action and combat.
If we don't get up there and stop her, there'll be a whole new alien army in a matter of hours.
On the surface, you've got to deal with both Dr. Proton's cyborgs and the aliens who are all fighting each other. It's like this huge skirmish where it's every man for himself. And you've also got Graves and Dylan helping you out too. Basically, this whole area is just this large open field with weapons scattered around and enemies who keep spawning in.
Not for long.
And you get to choose which guns you want to use and which way you want to attack enemies. It's great. I mean, this whole area is actually fun to play. I know, crazy. The bit after this is good too. You start moving through these tunnels, taking on pig cops and more Dukinators, and then an assault commander. After you reach the end of the tunnel, the whole thing starts to collapse and you all jump into a school bus and have to make it out before the whole thing caves in. At this point, you really know you're playing a Duke Nukem game because what comes next is the obligatory strip club level. I mean, had to happen, right?
The burning bush. Looks like holy ground to me.
Yeah, Duke and Dylan find themselves at the Burning Bush Strip Club, which has some kind of back door, no pun intended, into the Area 51 facility that has access to the moon teleporter. So Duke walks on into the strip club and he gets a pretty good view of the establishment, so to speak, and he meets the owner, Dr. Valencia. But he's told before he can gain access to the teleporter, he first has to help out with a bunch of odd jobs around the place, because it's not like the entire fate of the world is at stake, is it? Oh yeah, and I love how the newspaper is clipping through the table. One of these odd jobs involves dealing with a couple of incels causing drama with girls at the club. The other one's clearing out some rats in the basement, and then lastly refilling a generator with fuel. You can also play a pinball and an arcade machine for another ego boost.
Damn it.
There's a really interesting thing here too, where Duke refuses to play an arcade game called the Pimp Slapper, and you can even earn an achievement for doing this called Hedonist, Not Misogynist.
No fucking way I'm playing that piece of crap.
And you know what? I kind of respect that. Duke might love the ladies as much as the next man, but my dude's still got standards and morals. Just kind of made me like the guy a little bit more, know what I mean?
Oh, great.
But I don't know if that means that much though. When one floor up from this, you can come across something called a wall of panties. And look at that one, like, what's that stain supposed to be?
Goo!
Anyway, after wasting your time doing all this menial shit, you're finally allowed to return to your duty of saving the world from an alien invasion, and you head down to the moon teleporter base beneath the surface, without so much as a peck on the cheek from Dr. Valencia.
Damn it.
Then there's a bit more combat here where you have to fend off a few waves of aliens as they spawn in from the moon, but the room is littered with weapons and ammo crates, including the railgun and the expander, so this whole part's just a cakewalk. Finally though, we're on the moon and things are wrapping up. Duke figures out the aliens are again kidnapping our babes. What is it with these aliens, shooting down our rides and kidnapping our babes?
Oh, why do they always take the hot ones?
Then there's a pretty cool segment where you get to drive a buggy across the surface of the moon, running down assault troopers like you're playing Carmageddon.
This is where the rubber hits the road.
At one point the buggy runs out of fuel and you have to find a spare canister to top it up. Overall, this short little section is also pretty fun, and I really liked it for what it's worth. Shame is, like all of the good stuff in the DLC, it's over too quickly, and sadly they've saved the worst for last. Yep, we're finally up to the final boss fight, the Alien Empress. Sadly though, this whole thing is just complete garbage. It sucks. So the way you kill this bitch is by driving into her legs with a buggy, then killing a bunch of enemies that spawn in. Once you do this a few times, she bends over and you have to drive into her lady parts, which for some reason is on her stomach. Then you're sucked inside her and have to destroy an ovary. Do this twice and she's beaten. Now, ignoring the fact that the weak spot for this boss is its ovaries, I think this whole thing sucks because the controls for the buggy are designed to simulate low gravity, like being on the moon and that. Which makes sense, but it's about as fun as sticking a cactus down your pants and doing star jumps. So any chance this DLC might have had of leaving a half decent impression on me is ruined by how fucking bad this boss fight is. And now every time I think of the DLC, this is all I think of, and it makes me sick. Makes me sick! But once you've beaten this boss, the whole thing ends. In typical Duke Nukem fashion, it ends with Duke Nukem getting laid. This time around, it's implied he bangs the few dozen female prisoners on the moon base, and then you're thrown back to the main menu without so much as a reach around. But congratulations, because you've just finished the Doctor Who cloned me. Good for you. Now, picking a favourite between the DLC and the base game seems kinda silly, and almost like a pointless comparison, considering the base game's like around 7 or 8 hours long, but this DLC is only going to take 2 or 3 at absolute most. I think the reason people talk more fondly about the DLC is that it manages to pack a lot of what Duke Nukem Forever packed into its campaign into a campaign that goes for a quarter of the length. As a result, all of the good things seem much more prominent because you're experiencing them at a higher frequency. That's kind of the problem with the DLC too, is that just when it always starts to get going and you're getting into the swing of things, the segment always comes to an end and then you're just moving on to the next area. I feel like the whole theme of the Duke clones was also an excuse to include new content with a minimal amount of work to be done, because all they'd need to do for all of these scenes with the clones was just include the same character models over and over. Character models that they'd already had made. I mean, it's just Duke Nukem copy and pasted.
Scommetti sempre sul Duca.
Hence I think too why those two twins in Duke Nukem Forever were twins to begin with. You know what I mean? Like, it's just easier to use the same character model twice than to make separate ones. The expander as a new weapon is okay, I guess, but the ammo cap for this thing is really small, and you only get to use it like 3 times in the entire DLC. Same with the impregnator. I mean, it's a cool weapon, but it's just really a slimy grenade launcher. It's not all that revolutionary or amazing that it's worth playing the DLC just to experience. It's not on the same level as the wall of panties anyway. Playing through this after Duke Nukem Forever is like you've just eaten some overcooked steak, then a waiter brings out some sticky date pudding that they heated up in the microwave. And I mean, yeah, sure, you like steak and you're partial to a bit of sticky date pudding, but you'd really rather prefer some sorbet or a nice creme brulee. You see where I'm going with this? My point is that the DLC is fine and dandy if you consider everything else that comes along with it, but there's just no reason to play it or waste your time with it when the other options out there are just so much better.
Oh, great.
Honestly, I think even Duke Nukem 3D deals with the whole theme of traveling to space and rescuing kidnapped babes better anyway. Yep, Duke 3D was a good game. But I mean, if you just had to have more Duke Nukem Forever content, well, it sure could have been worse.
Ta-ta and farewell.